gonna just stand here for a second. Let me grab a sip of water because there's usually a delay on YouTube, and those of you on Facebook usually catch it right on. So we are working on a mesh zipper pouch demo today. So welcome everybody. I see you're putting in the YouTube chat, at least is what I see here. Some of y'all are saying where you're tuning in from. I'm coming to y'all from my home sewing studio here in North Central Florida. Sounds like the audio, the visual technology is on our side, so we're good there. Hi everybody. Hey Barb. Hey Margie. Awesome. We got friends tuning in from BC, Canada, Pennsylvania, California, Wisconsin. Awesome. Hey, Claudia from North Carolina. So if you are subscribed to my YouTube channel and you've hit the little bell icon, then you probably got a notification letting you know that this morning I posted a new video tutorial, and it is for this little mesh pouch. Super cute, great to hold all kinds of stuff. Y'all know I love my zipper pouches. I probably have over a dozen video tutorials on different types of zippered pouches. And this one has mesh on the front. You could always substitute the mesh for some clear vinyl. That would be cool too. But this is the pouch, and I'm going to do a demo on it to share with you how I make it. Of course, I have a step-by-step video tutorial, but if you're just tuning in to kind of just chit-chat with us and watch me make one, you'll see how quick and easy it can be. And it is a great scrap buster. I have a lot of them. I made, what, 5 already. The next one I'm making is actually going to be for me. So let's go ahead and switch to the over-the-shoulder camera here. And I'm going to show you what fabrics I chose. So if you're in my bag club, you've seen this fabric because I made myself a Herrera bag with this. Super cute, just a bunch of sewing notions. And so I'm going to use this one to throw in with my retreat stuff so that when we do have retreats again, we can take some of our sewing supplies. So I think this is going to be a cute one. And the mesh is really fun because you can still see through it, but it also can breathe. This is a great fabric to use for like beach bags, pool bags, and that kind of stuff, obviously, so that the sand can drain out of it through all the bigger holes. But it's also great fun to put in a simple project like this, okay? So here are the supplies. We'll go over them real quick. I have 2 rectangles here. I'm using the same fabric, but you can do 2 different if you wanted to. The exterior fabric is the fabric that will show here, and then the lining fabric is the fabric that shows inside and is behind the mesh fabric itself. Okay, really fun. And you can see that we're using really small pieces of fabric, so you can use all kinds of chunks that you have left over from other projects. All right, then for the batting, I'm using this you can see how kind of light and sheer that is. This is a Bozo light fusible batting. Of course, the links to all the supplies that we're using is in the description box below of this video on YouTube. We're putting it in the chat on Facebook for you and in the step-by-step tutorial where I go through a little bit slower than this and show you how to make the project. All right, then the mat, and these I should say are all cut to the same size, 7 inches by 10. All right, then we have our mesh fabric, which I like to cut a little bit bigger. And if you're new to sewing with mesh, these are some great little tips. You can see that the mesh stretches. So in this direction, it stretches, and if I tug it in this direction, it moves a little, but it doesn't stretch quite as much. However, because it is also an open fabric, you can imagine that as you're sewing, especially if you're sewing along the stretchier side, you know, the presser foot and the feed ducts can stretch things out, and really easily you can have your stuff be completely wonky. So one of the tips that I use for beginners is to cut it a little bit bigger, and that way it won't shrink or budge or completely distort on you to where you get to putting the whole little pouch together and then you realize I need to trim it even smaller because I'm missing mesh on one side. And if you've sewn mesh fabric before and that has happened to you, you know what I'm talking about, and use that tip for next time. Start off with a piece that's a little bit bigger. You'll have a little waste, but you can ensure that all your hard work, you'll at least end up with the pouch you want, okay? Then we have 2 little binding strips that we use to finish off the mesh and the zipper. And these are cut 1 1/4 by 10. All right, super simple. Then we have a zipper, and this is just a, excuse me, a number 3 craft zipper, has plastic teeth so we can sew right through it. And I recommend at least a 12-inch zipper. Now, if you're not familiar with zipper measurements, the zippers are actually measured from metal to metal. So the metal stop here to this metal stop here is the length of it, okay? Not from the end to the end of the zipper tape, so keep that in mind. So it should be 12 inches at least from here to here. Mine happens to be 14 because I have a big stash of 14-inch zippers, okay? Oh, Valerie, you're sweet. She says, as always, Vanessa looks great. Thanks, girl. It's the lighting in here, you know, it makes me look alive. All right, so I'm going to prep first by fusing my light fusible batting to the exterior fabric. I'm going to heat up my iron real quick. You always want the adhesive dots, which is the scratchier side of all your fusible interfacing products, going up so that then you can place the fabric with the wrong side down onto it. And I like to grab my little spray mist bottle of water. If you use steam, like you'll need steam, depending on the manufacturer of the product that you're using. I spritz it with water first and then hit it with a dry iron. But you could also just put water in your iron if you use whatever distilled or whatever water you need to use so that it doesn't gunk up your iron. We have really hard water here because we have a well, so that's why I prefer to just spray separate and then add the heat. Then I don't ever have to clean my iron. Inside, that is. On the bottom, you can see that I do have some, over time, the fusible adhesives and stuff kind of gunk up your iron here and there. So it does obviously help to clean it up. My fabric is dark. I'll get away with it here. All right, so I'm just fusing it into place real quick. Make sure I'm drying up the fabric completely because I did spray it with water. And then I'll give it a second to cool, and I'll check it to make sure that everything is fused down well. All right, let's see. Oh, thank you, Joan. She says, I love your fabric. It's so cute. I think so, too. Super cute. And I'm just using my Martelli the ironing mat that comes in as a part of the 3-piece roundabout. Y'all have seen me cut on the rotating mat. This is the little ironing surface that comes on the spinning wheel. Okay, and this, it's small, it's cute, and it works great for this. Okay, so this looks like it's really good and stuck. I'm just trying to peel the fabric up off the edges especially. Inside, no wrinkles. Looks good. So now let's move on. That's my exterior. This is my lining. Grab your lining fabric. It doesn't have anything on it. Excuse me, not that, the mesh. Haha, let's prep the mesh one first. So I'm going to grab one of my fabric strips. And in the video tutorial, I tell you to flip it so that the pretty side of the fabric is face down. All right, but I happen to be using solid fabric there. If you are new and you're a beginner and you're just like, this is way too much, pretty side, wrong side, too much fabric, it would be awesome to make this with just solid fabrics because that will cut out that extra level of complexity that you could potentially mess up in, right? If it's solid, it usually has the same on the front or the back and you can't tell the difference, and that will help eliminate that little bit that can confuse you if you're using print fabrics, okay? Now I'm going to flip this here and I'm centering my fabric strip on the mesh. The mesh is a little bigger. Remember, we're starting off with mesh a little bit bigger so that if there's any movement, we'll still have enough to trim it down to the proper size at the end. Okay, so I'm going to grab my sewing machine here. Let me put my iPad there. You definitely want to install your zipper foot for this one, just because the way that I stitch it to the zipper is going to be super duper close. I've already installed my zipper foot here, even though I don't really need it right now, but you're going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance. Actually, I'll put the other one back just because I know where to move the needle on this machine to get exactly 1/4 inch following the edge of my presser foot here. So scoot this back so y'all can see a little bit better what I'm doing. Okay. And I will zoom there up. Okay, so needle needs to be scooted over this way. For me on this machine, if you have a machine that you can put a 1/4 inch foot on, like a 1/4 inch guide, do that. Whatever you need to do for your machine. For me, I'm going to go here. Okay, and then you're going to line it up at the top edge. And I'm at a weird angle here, but bear with me. Make sure my needle is down. And so here, remember, this is the stretchier side. Try not to stretch the mesh. Just let the machine feed it through. Little by little. And I always like to set it so that it stops with the needle down. That way, if I need to readjust anything. I didn't put pins, and some of you may be wondering why. The mesh is such an open fabric, it doesn't even make sense. Like, you're going to put the pin right through the hole completely, and it won't even make much sense. So either using a wash away wonder tape or holding it like this and just going little by little works fine. We'll see if I don't make this too wonky. I'm kind of sewing crooked here, and I can't see well. But, okay. So there's that. Now my stitch length was a little bit short here, but you should have a shorter stitch length when you're sewing through the mesh because the mesh openings are so wide and open. If you start stitching with really big stitches, you may find over time that they more easily come out. So in certain places, you'll see that I sew kind of multiple seams when it goes through the mesh, like the first basting row of stitching around it, and then the full final completion of stitching the bag up, and that definitely will help you with that, okay? All right, iron again. I'm gonna press this real quick. Now this is something you may not know about the mesh. This fabric can actually, this mesh fabric that we sell in our shop, it's the Bianni's one, and it actually can stand to be hit with an iron a little bit, you know, so I don't have to avoid it completely. It hasn't melted on me yet, and I've been using this for years. So now, oh my gosh, I'm on yellow on yellow on yellow here. Sorry about that, y'all. But I'm gonna fold this back on the stitch line. And you need to do it little by little, because if you go like this, the mesh is so lightweight that you'll flip the whole thing over. So that's why I just go a little, finger crease it, a little, finger crease it, right on that stitch line. What I'm doing is getting that seam allowance to pop up behind the fabric strip. So here, here, here. Okay, now we'll hit it with the iron to kind of get it to sit flat. Tailor's clappers back in stock, y'all. I know we were sold out for several weeks. We have them in the shop right now, and we got a big order. So if you've been one of the ones waiting to get a tailor's clapper, we have them. And that just helps us set really flat seams, creases. It's great for patchwork, quilting, clothes. When I make my hems, I definitely use my clapper. Now I'm flipping it over, and I'm going to fold the opposite long edge over till it meets that seam line that we just sewed. And then give that a press. Okay. Oh, Chloe says, I have to get that machine that you're working on. So we're actually sold out right now of the Juki LB5020s, but we do have an order in. It's just been such, you know, so many delays going on, getting machines in and all that. But if you get on the wait list, if you go to the product page on our site, you can add your name to the wait list, and that way when they're restocked, we shoot you, or my website automatically shoots you an email letting you know that they're back in stock. But yeah, we just sold the last one a couple days ago again. And we stay restocking them. We sell out, then we restock them. So we will keep you posted once we get more in, okay? All right. Kathy says she loves her clapper. Yes, yes, we do. I have multiples, and whenever I can't find it, I'm like, no, I need my clapper. All right, so what I ended up doing here was I folded it up, and then I lifted up the seam allowance and tucked under this edge, right under it. Give it a good press. If it doesn't lie super flat for you because maybe your iron doesn't get quite as hot as mine, you can always use, let me find mine, some glue to help base that down. And this is just a washable white Elmer's glue. You can put a couple dots under the seam allowance and then hit it with an iron, and that will help kind of set the glue by drying it, and will help keep this area here a little bit flatter for you. If you find that you need it, you know, not a big deal. You could also use a glue stick, whatever fabric safe basting technique, or glue basting technique, I should say, you like to use. And you'll see with a couple dots of glue here, once I dry it with the heat of this dry iron, no moisture, and you can see how much I'm hitting that mesh, and it hasn't melted on me yet. So it's great for working on these types of projects. So nice and flat. Let's grab our zipper next, and let's see how I can do this. I don't do my best work live, but take your zipper. I always like to open my zippers from left to right, like this. So at this point, you need to decide, do I open my zippers, or whoever you're giving it to, from left to right or from right to left? Because you want to position your zipper the way that it will be when it's closed, okay? So if you're opening from right to left, make sure it's closed and the zipper pull is on this side for me, and this bag is for me, it's gonna go this way. Now I take this little bound edge of the mesh, and I'm gonna just, it doesn't have to be perfectly centered, the excess will get trimmed away, but I'm just gonna put it somewhere where I have enough room to not deal with the ends here. And I'm just gonna place this bound edge on top of the zipper tape, and we're just gonna sew it with our zipper foot top stitch. At the top of this little, let me show you here, at the top of the edge of the fabric part, making sure that you don't stitch actual or over the actual zipper teeth. Any stitches that are over top of these teeth is going to block that zipper from opening, okay? So you have to align it right along this edge, and then I'll stitch it again at the bottom to connect it to kind of like the bottom edge of the zipper tape, okay? And so now let me take off that regular foot I was sewing with. My zipper foot is here, and I'm installing it on the left bar of my zipper foot, and I'll show you how to orient your zipper here. So I set it up like this. The project is going to my right, and then the zipper is on the left side here, because the needle position, not there. Like right now, I was sewing a 1/4 inch seam, so I moved the needle over. You have to be very careful with this, because if I start to sew Can you see that that needle is going to clip the side of the metal there? It needs to be put back to its default needle position in order for it to be aligned with an opening on a zipper foot, because the universal foot has an entire opening. So you can move the needle here and there and you still have room for the needle to come down and take stitches, okay? But when you're using a decorative stitch or you're using a specialty foot and you've adjusted and changed the needle position, pay attention. I guarantee you. Why don't you all let me know if you've ever moved the needle position, then put on like a zipper foot, for example, and started to sew, and when the needle came down and just hit the presser foot and broke? Let me know in the comments below. I think y'all will see that it is more common than a lot of us think. Now I'm lengthening my stitch length to about 3 millimeters in length because this is kind of top stitch. Although it is a construction seam, I know y'all hear me say when it's a construction seam, to hold two things together, I use a shorter stitch length. But it's a zipper, and because we're doing 2 rows of stitching, it'll be a little bit more reinforced than just one. Sue Fullwood says, oh, never, with a bunch of laughing emojis. I'm sure you've never done it, Sue. That's hilarious. That's why you got to pay attention. A lot of people think you can just plug up a sewing machine and start stitching. They think it's so easy. There's a lot, because the sewing machines allow us to do so many things, right? Even if a basic machine, I mean, this is a basic machine, and I can still do a lot of different things, okay? So you have to pay attention to what you're doing and know what needs to be changed and when. So now I'm like all the way over here. I did not center this as well as I would have liked. So this is what I mean by not staying away from this stuff. I mean, I can still sew close to it because I have the zipper foot on, but I'm going to have to stop with the needle in, lift my presser foot, scoot the zipper pull out of the way, and then realign it. If you center it better than I did, so you have a longer tail here, you won't have to do this. It's just extra time taken up, no big deal. All right. So first step. Looks super cute so far, but you can see how this is already like it wants to move on me a little bit, which is no problem. I'm going to go ahead and attach the next strip to the top here, and then we're going to trim things up. So that's why I say with the mesh fabric, if you've never used it before, start with a slightly bigger piece so that you, I mean, because even if it shrinks on you a little bit or it moves and distorts and changes the measurement, you can trim it up. It's just you're going to have to trim away more, and then you're going to make your project even smaller. So that's what we're trying to avoid with that, okay? All right. Okay. Susan says, I've done things like that and broken needles too many times. It happens. It happens. And it mostly happens when you like finish working on a project and you just leave the machine the way that it was set, right? Then you take a few days off, you come back to it, you don't remember because you're not picking up right then, you know, and you're starting a different project. And so then it can happen. Okay, next step. We're going to take the next fabric strip, flip it pretty side face down on top now, this top edge of your zipper. And I'm going to do the same thing, aligning the edge of this fabric with the edge of the previous fabric, not with the edge of the mesh, because obviously the mesh is a little bit bigger, okay? So the edge of the fabric. And then we're going to take it back to the sewing machine here, still with the zipper foot. And we're going to sew close to the zipper teeth here. Let me see if I can get in there without the zipper pull getting hung up on the zipper foot itself. And I'm not going to be able to. So I need to open this again, the same way that we finished it off. Open it up, then stitch a little bit, and then I can close it back up. Okay, so for me, and of course you can use wash away wonder tape, you can use clips, pins, whatever you want to do. You can see that I'm just going to go and measure with it little by little as I sew. So I'm using the edge of my zipper foot as the guide to align the fabric and the edge of the zipper tape. So I'm about halfway there. I'm just going to close this up, lift the zipper foot up, close my zipper, and I feel like that just gives me a little bit more stability when it's fully closed because there's like more body there to hold on to for sewing, especially when you don't have clips or pins in place. This is wanting to move on me. Stay put. There. And you can see that the fabric moves a little bit too. I have not starched this fabric, and it's just a loosely woven, you know, quilting cotton. So little by little is key. Don't think that it's you if you feel like it's moving on you a little bit. It's also just the nature of the beast. Okay, press this flat real quick. I always press every time I sew. And then I'm going to pull this up and away. And I just finger crease it. This also gives me an opportunity to peek and see and make sure that I didn't stitch over top of the teeth. I still have enough clearance. Sometimes here I like to just open the zipper and make sure, good, there's nothing getting caught there, so we know we're good to proceed. Give that a good press. Perfect. Now let's trim this up. You know what? I'm going to stitch it down first. So grab your lining fabric. And the lining fabric is the one that doesn't have the interfacing. It's just the 7" by 10" rectangle by itself. Then pretty side facing up, we're going to take our mesh pocket and place it pretty side on top, just like we did. You'll notice that it's going to be bigger. So the way that you want to align it is the top edge of the fabric of this mesh pocket with the top edge of the fabric of the I was going to say the Notions fabric, like you're going to be using the same fabric as me. I'm going to place it like that. Align this up top. And so that way I give myself, okay, I have a little bit of mesh bigger on all sides, but you can see that it's not bigger equally on all sides. That's why I gave myself that wiggle room. Then I'll go back and clean it up, trim it, and that won't affect the finished size of my pouch, all right? So that's why we started off with that mesh fabric a little bit bigger. I'm going to put a couple clips up top. You can put clips all the way around. Again, because the mesh does move a little bit on you. You know, line it up where you need it. Then it'll make it easier for you to maintain it in that same spot as you sew. These, I usually don't put clips down here just because the fabric sticks out a lot more. Here's fine. Again, try not to distort the mesh or stretch it. It will stretch, which is good to have it like in a pocket or in a little pouch like this because you can hold more stuff, right? It will have some room in there and more give for whatever you're filling it with. Now, very important step. Open your zipper at this point because we're going to stitch down all 4 sides. We're basically top stitching the mesh pocket to the lining fabric to combine them into one layer, all right? And so you're going to go and stitch over the zipper teeth in this area here and here. And if you leave the zipper pull outside of where you will be stitching, you won't have a zipper pull to actually use, okay? So very important. Just open it up a little bit. Now let's stitch it up. And here, since we're done with the zipper, we're going to change back away from our zipper foot. I'm going to put my regular universal foot back on. I love it because these just clip on and off. Easy peasy. There we go. Oh, my allergies are on 1,000 today, y'all. I had a friend come earlier for a little farm tour, so we were outside. Okay, I'm going to start anywhere on here. Just start on a straight side. I think it makes it easier. And the seam allowance is just 1/8 of an inch. So super close to the outer edge. We're basically just basting it together so we have one layer now. And I'm going to leave it at 3 millimeters. And then I'm just stitching close to the edge. Easy peasy, let me see. Oh, Joan is asking a great question. All the other ones that I made, I used the size 80-12 universal needle. This one has a 90-14 needle in it because it's in here from like the faux leather projects that I had made. And so it's a 90-14, but it's kind of overkill. You don't need a 90-14 needle for this. The interfacings used are not very bulky. Just make sure to accommodate your needle size based on the fabrics that you'll be using. For example, if instead of mesh fabric, which is really thin and open, you use clear vinyl, then you may want to use a different needle, okay? And lengthen your stitch length too because you don't want to perforate it all the way. Okay. All right, let's see. Coffee Powdered Home is asking what streaming software we are using. We are using Ecamm and Restream, yes? Ecamm and Restream, that's what we use. Ecamm for the lives, and then let me go back stitch over the zipper teeth. I just like to do that for extra reinforcement. And then Restream is the program that allows us to stream live on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. Okay, so here I'm coming down to the side and you can see the mesh. I mean, I can really manipulate it any which way. I'm just gonna have it lie flat so there's no puckers and then just carefully feed it through. Still staying close to the outer. And you can see, look how close it is right here. If I wouldn't have given myself that extra room, it would be short. So better to give yourself a little extra. Which way? This way? Oh, me. Oh, because I'm not in the bubble. I know this is like a weird angle for me to have to sew at, y'all. Sorry about that. Like this. It's like my body's here, but my face needs to be here. Sorry about that. All right, so again, across the bottom, notice I like to put my hand right here. It's kind of like to smooth out that mesh and hold it flat to help minimize the amount of distortion and manipulating that could be going on. So I'm just helping it feed through, staying close to the bottom edge, trying to see if I can see my fabric. I'm like 2.5 feet away from the machine, still trying to see. Okay. And you know what? I'm saying this to try and keep the mesh fabric flat, but if it does pucker on you a little bit or you get a little bit distortion, don't worry about having to rip out all the stitches and losing your project completely, because like I mentioned earlier, it does have some give. So whatever you put in the project will kind of stretch it out. So even though empty, it might look like there's a little, you know, kind of like a pinched spot in some areas. The finished project, I say still go ahead and finish it, use it, and then just learn for your next one. But I don't want you to feel like it's a complete loss either, okay? If you do have the mesh move on you a bit. All right, we're coming down the other side. Again, I just stop and double check that everything is nice and smooth, flat, and that's it really. This is the step before the last once I combine this. So at the zippered area here, because the zipper has to be open to go over this area, just hold it with your fingers closed like it would be so that you can position the strip and the zipper tape flat the way that it will be once it's finished, like this. So instead of letting it pop out like that, do it like this. And I'm just realizing I didn't top stitch on the bottom even though I said I was going to. No worries. You can top stitch or not, but now it's too late for me to go back and do it. That's what happens when you're talking and sewing at the same time. Okay, I'm coming across to the last little bit. This is where I started. Okay, that's done. Janice says, very cool, we'll make this one. I'm so glad. I've been seeing on some of the, I've been reading some of the comments on the video tutorial for the same project that I posted on my channel already. And a lot of you are like, wow, I think I can make this one. I'm guessing it's people who maybe have not ventured out into zippers or mesh fabric. So I'm really glad that, you know, from watching the video tutorial, it makes y'all feel like that's something doable for you. That's always the goal for me as a teacher. All right, so let's go ahead and just trim this up. And by trim up, I mean following my background fabric, the lining fabric, which is the background, because that was cut perfectly to size, I'm using that kind of as a template guide, okay? So I'm just, and you can use scissors if you want, to, but you can also use a ruler if you want to, if you feel like you need it and you don't have a very stable hand for a rotary cutter. That's fine too. So I'm just following the bottom edge of my fabric here, which is cool because you can see right through the mesh too, right? And then here, I'm going to finish trimming this up. And you see, we did have a little bit of the waste of the mesh, but trust me, losing this little bit is a lifesaver for not having to trim it all the way down. Because if you're short on mesh here, you'll have to trim it down until you have all 3 layers. Otherwise, you'll end up just with a straight up hole in your pouch. So try those tips when you're working on this project. All right, last step. We're going to take the exterior fabric, which is the one that was interfaced to that Bosal light fusible batting, okay? And I'm going to flip it pretty side face down on top of the mesh pocket that we've made, prepped, and basted here. Make sure that the zipper is out of the way. You don't want to have it on either end because sometimes the little metal part will want to flip over beyond, and then you hit metal and nobody's happy, and you can break a needle and mess up your machine. So I just put it in the middle for safety, right? Make sure it's out of my way. Then we're going to place this on top, pretty sides touching. They should match up now. All 4 sides should be back to being the same measurement. And so if they're not at this point, you can trim things up a little bit. If they're off by like 1/8 of an inch, just leave it because it's small enough that it will still be caught in the seam allowance. And again, I don't want you to have to, you know, make your project smaller by trimming, just so you can have perfectly straight edges. There's ways around everything, y'all. We can troubleshoot any little bits that may be a little off. Okay, so now for this, pay attention to where your zipper is. I'm going to take these off so you can see. The zipper's at the top. This is where you want to leave your opening, somewhere here. And the opening should just be about 2.5 to 3 inches. I always like to go a little bit smaller, so the smaller the opening here, the less you're going to have to tuck under, and the less of a chunk you have to have it be uneven for the top stitching part. So here, here. But then, the smaller the opening, the longer it will take you to flip it right side out. But for me, that's an okay trade-off. So I mark it so I know I'm not sewing in those spots. Then we're going to go back here. Let me see if this is what I'll do. And that way I can stand right here in the middle. Perfect. Is that better? Great. All right, so we're starting on one end of my mark because I'm going to sew just all the way around and leave that section that I've marked open. I need to move my needle position over on here because I'm sewing a 1/4 inch seam. And so this is something to note. I oftentimes, because I'm a quilter, even in bag projects, I will still use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But if you're not used to sewing a 1/4 inch, which for some people that come from garment sewing where they're using 1/2 inch or 5/8, they see a 1/4 inch of like, I'm barely catching the fabric, right? And so it takes some getting used to. I'm back stitching at the beginning here, and then I'm going to continue stitching. But if a 1/4 inch feels too small for you, you can use 3/8 inch. As long as you're consistent, it will work out throughout, right? Overall, you're just going to end up with a slightly smaller pouch, but it's not the end of the world. As long as you're consistent, you don't want to sew a 1/4 inch here, then a 1/2 inch here, and 3/4 on the bottom. It's just going to be super wonky. And I'm just pivoting on the corners. Sometimes I find that I like to backstitch right there over where the zipper teeth is, just so like where I'm kind of opening and closing and using it a lot, it doesn't start to pop off. So it's just like an extra thing that I do because it doesn't take long and I just feel better. It makes me feel like I'm reinforcing it more. All right, we're coming down to this bottom corner. See, I tried to gauge it. That looked like a 1/4 inch. I leave the needle in the project. I lift the presser foot and I check, and when I put this down, it's too big of a seam allowance. So I need to take one more stitch, then pick it up, and now I'm spot on. You get better at kind of eyeballing that over time, but all right, we're almost done. Last corner. You have a question? No. Crystal's asking, did she give the fabric dimensions for this bag? I did give the fabric dimensions at the beginning of the video, but there's also a step-by-step video tutorial for this on my YouTube channel, and everything is there too. So the rectangles were 7 by 10. Let me backstitch over the zipper. Rectangles were 7 by 10. The batting was the same, 7 by 10. The fabric strips for the binding of the mesh and whatever, and like the mesh and the zipper were 1 1/4 by 10, and the mesh was 6 1/2 by 10 1/2. Super easy. Once y'all make 5 or 6 like me, you'll have everything memorized. All right, I'm coming back around to where my mark is. I'm back stitching right there. And you always want to back stitch on either side of where you're leaving an opening, because now I'm going to kind of put pressure on those starting and stopping points of that seam to flip the whole thing right side out. So if you don't back stitch there, you're going to end up pulling out the stitches both at the beginning and at the end, and you'll end up with a way bigger opening than you wanted. Okay, next, scissors. We're going to clip the corners at a 45-degree angle. Make sure you don't cut the stitches of the final seam that we just sewed. You will cut through the basting stitches because those were sewn at a narrower seam allowance, right? That's okay. Don't worry about that. But this is what I mean by 2 rows of stitching that go through the mesh. And so that makes it even sturdier. So just cut all 4 corners at a 45-degree angle just to reduce a little bit of that bulk. Next, I'm going to go here where my opening is and flip the whole thing out. I like to use either a knitting needle or a chopstick to help poke out those corners. You can see. But see, you don't need that big of an opening. This was like 2 inches because it's not that bulky and it's not big. So don't feel like you have to leave a 5-inch opening. Just leave a little bit and you can work with it. All right. Paula's asking, do I clean my iron when it gets dirty? So I do if I find that I'm having problems with it. If it's like gunking stuff up or it smells smoky or I feel like it's just super dirty. Or if you go to press on like white fabric and you see gunk on there, then definitely you're beyond the point of where you should have cleaned it. But yeah, I have a YouTube video too on my tips for cleaning the sole of an iron plate. Whenever you're looking for a video, if you want to see if I have a video on a certain topic, just go to youtube.com and in the search bar type in Crafty Gemini first, like 2 separate words, and then whatever words of whatever it is you're looking for. So if you type in Crafty Gemini, how to clean an iron, my video will pop up for you. Okay? All right. Sandra says, didn't you mean the mesh was 7 1/2 by 10 1/2? No, it's 6 1/2. Remember, it doesn't have to be bigger here because the mesh doesn't extend all the way. You have to account for the binding here, the zipper tape area. So this is what makes up the difference. Okay? So, yeah, it was 6 1/2 by 10 1/2. Okay. So, I'm just poking out the corners. And notice, do something a little bit blunt, something wood. You don't want to go with like the tip of scissors or something. You're going to bust a hole right through your project. Look at that. How cute. But it still needs a press. If y'all watch the tutorial, see. And this is how I teach kids when I taught in person. Every time we sew a seam, we press a seam. They get so tired of me. I'm like, you sewed something? You better go straight to the ironing board. So here, I'm going to give this a press. Remember my mesh fabric? Look at that. Didn't melt. I also press it from behind here because sometimes you get wrinkles as you're, manipulating the fabric and just messing with it to get it flipped out. Then at the top here, I just have this little opening. And when the opening is this small, it almost tucks its own self in. So all you got to do is finish tucking it in. Make sure, look at that, perfectly straight. Make sure it's aligned with the rest of the top seam. Give it a press. This is where I grab my clapper to help set that up. Really, really flat and set it in place. Then I flip it and do the same thing from the other side. Because when you have multiple interfacings, this helps. Sometimes it just doesn't carry through the bulky layers. So I'll do that. Okay. Super cute. So now I'm going to open it just to make sure, admire my work, and then finish it off with one last seam. We're just going to top stitch across the top. If you don't like the look of top stitching on the outside of your pouch like this, which you can barely see, you can also just hand stitch that close with like a quilting or binding stitch that we use as quilters, like the invisible stitch, a ladder stitch, something like that that won't show, and you can just stitch that shut. For me, looks like I just unplugged my sewing machine. I'm just going to use a straight stitch, and I'm going to lengthen my stitch length a little bit too, to 3 millimeters. All right. And we're just going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Yep, you can see me there. Line it up at the end. 1, 2 stitch. Go back 1. There. And then make sure I'm stopping with my needle down. I'm just tugging on everything, aligning it. And then I'm just riding that needle right there, about 1/8 of an inch in, super close to the top edge. I should have poked this out a little bit more. I can still pull it. That really bothers me. But anyways. And there. A couple back stitches at the end. We're going to trim our threads. And of course I sewed. Even though it's a top stitch, I'm going to press. Why am I grabbing this? I have no idea. All right. So there we go. Super cute, and of course I missed 2 rows of top stitching, but you get the point. If you watch the video tutorial, I tell you when exactly to do it, but if you forget like me, it's no big deal. It still works out super cute. Okay, so there is your meshed zippered pouch. We have 2 rows of stitching going around all the 3 sides of the mesh, I should say, so you know that this mesh is not going to come out here, because sometimes if your stitches are long and you only have 1 row of stitches, you can find over time, especially if you're putting bulkier items in here that are stretching the mesh at the seam, that it can pull out. So try this. Be a great introduction into mesh fabric. Remember that we sell the mesh fabric. We sell in a ton of different colors. We sell the light Bosal fusible batting, the tailor's clapper. We even sell this. We sell the cutting mat. We have about like hundreds of items in our online shop, and I feel like I always have to remind people, because sometimes people are like, you sell stuff? It's like, yeah, we have a big online shop. So if you're one of those people that had no idea that we sell stuff, we do. We have a big online shop, and you can shop with us at craftygemini.com/shop. We always include links in the description box below, as well as in the chat, both on Facebook and on YouTube. So yeah, I think somebody was asking about sewing a seam line. Let me move this yellow. I feel like I have so much yellow in this shot. Someone asked about, can you sew a seam line right down the middle to make 2 little pockets here? I'm assuming if you're going to do that, you're wanting it to still open at the top, but then once it opens, this would be 2. It would be kind of tight because this would not pull away. But if you're wondering if you can like stitch partitions into mesh, absolutely. It holds up super, super well. I've done other bag projects that I teach video courses on, and I've used it in my bag clubs. And you can definitely, actually, let me grab a bag just so y'all can see it in a different application for those of you that have never seen the mesh fabric before. This is the 3rd bag that I've taught in my my 7th edition bag club that we're in right now. We're done with bag 3. Bag 4 goes up on Saturday. Anyways, this is my Vega project bag, and you can see this is a zippered mesh pocket, right? Built in here. This, of course, is bigger and it's designed to hold more, so there's definitely some other things that we've done here to reinforce it top and bottom. But, I mean, we make so many different kinds of bags with the mesh fabric. And it's fun that it comes in a bunch of colors, too, so you can use it, you know, to coordinate with whatever fabrics you end up using, okay? So, mesh fabric, give it a go, super cool, and we sell it in like 14 different colors or something wild like that. Here are the finished mesh zipper pouches. If you're just tuning in, you can go back and watch the rest of the video. And I also have a separate step-by-step video tutorial that's only like 9.5 minutes long where I show you how to make my fun little mesh pouches. All right, let me make sure I don't have any other last-second questions here to answer. Yeah, Liz is saying that the mesh is a little sturdy. It's not loosey-goosey. Absolutely. I was mentioning earlier, you can make full-on beach bags, tote bags, like for actual weight to be holding on to it. You would want to reinforce it just because of the seam, like I mentioned in this one, that it's open. So if you just have one line of longer stitches holding it in place, you run the risk of it eventually working out over time. But the more reinforcing that you can do multiple times in a seam or shorter stitches, that way you grab more of the open mesh fabric. That really helps. Okay, Kim says, I'm going to make this cute bag. Thank you. You're welcome. Kathy says she placed her order. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. We definitely appreciate it. Mary says they're so cute. Thank you. Somebody's asking about the 5" by 10" ruler. This ruler that I shared several weeks back, we sold out super duper quick. I'm waiting on a huge order. If you're on the wait list, and there are hundreds of you on the wait list, as soon as we receive our order, you'll get that email notification letting you know. But they take a while to manufacture, to screen print, and we get them done in the US, so everything is a little bit more delayed here. As soon as we get them, you will be notified, okay? All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today, and guess I will see you next Wednesday for another episode of WIP Wednesday. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're not, and click the bell icon so it can notify you every time I post a new video, because I am working on more, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.